December 8th, so on Monday. Have a look at the website for what's required for applying to one of these fellowships. And it's my pleasure to introduce Akosh, who is my postdoc in the Department of History and Philosophy of Science, and for visa reason was unable to cover earlier. So he's just coming at the end of the semester. So Akosh is not a psychologist and a cognitive scientist, but with interest also in philosophy of science. So if you want to talk to him after, take the opportunity to have a chat with him. All right. Today it's my pleasure to introduce Armin Schulz, who is professor of philosophy at the University of Kansas. He's also the chair of the Department of Philosophy there. Many of you know his work, published widely in the biology, the cognitive science, often but not always, with the focus of bringing evolutionary theory to bear on issues in the philosophy of social sciences and in the philosophy of cognitive science. He has published 4 books that I mentioned only the 2 most recent books, both published this year. It's Only Human, The Evolution of Distinctively Human Cognition with Oxford University Press, which was published earlier this year, and also Presenting Social Functionalism, bringing contemporary evolutionary biology to the social science, all published in Springer also a few months ago. And today, Armin will be talking about agency, which was a topic of actually quite a few papers.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine.
I mean, as you know, quite a bit about agency, but agency is a case for an eliminative pluralism.
Okay.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, and thank you for being here last day. Possibly. Is it Friday? It is Friday.
It is Friday.
Last day of the semester officially, and for all this. So I appreciate you sticking around for that. So that's appreciated. The title is pretty bad. Generally, I'm bad with titles. This title is one of my worst. And so this is, I think, the 3rd time I'm giving this thing, and I'm sort of learning that the title actually confuses people. So don't worry too much about that, and it's really more, don't worry particularly about the pluralism. That's kind of not great. It's more really the eliminativism that's going to do the work, and even that is a kind of, in some ways, a silly word. Anyway, well, what I should have not done is turn it off. Oh, that's exciting.
Now it should be working.
Yeah, fantastic. So agency, as I've just learned, unsurprisingly, people are talking about it a lot these days. And unsurprisingly, also, one of the main reasons for that is that it seems to crop up in lots of places, in lots of different contexts. Whether you're doing evolutionary biology, whether you're doing, evogenetics or computer science, economics, in lots of places. But despite the fact that there's agency everywhere, I think it's also fair to say that it's not yet clear exactly what it means to be an agent. It's not clear what sorts of things are agents, and it's not even clear what it would mean to give an answer to the question of what things are agent and what it means to be an agent. So if you like to think about it this way, it's like neither the intention nor the extension of agent is clear, nor is it clear what it would mean to specify the intention or the extension of that. So what I want to do is walk through this as I see it in reverse order. So I'm going to start with C and then go to B and A from that. So what sort of question are we asking? We ask about the question about the nature of agency. I think there's sort of, broadly speaking, there's 3 different kinds of projects, different answers that people have been given in this. People sometimes carve it up, but slightly differently. But I think, as I'll try to make clear, I think for me, this is a helpful way to carve up the issue. So you can do some broadly epistemological interpretationist thing. You could do some sort of broadly metaphysical, natural kindy thing, or you could do some broadly scientific conceptual thing. So let's look at these briefly. If you're an epistemology interpretationist on the question of agency, which in some ways I think is, to my surprise, it's gotten super popular again. I don't think it was kind of popular and then it kind of went away, but I think that's gotten very popular. The question is something like, oh, when you ask about what things are agents, what it means to be an agent, you're asking under what circumstances, towards which systems is it plausible, helpful, useful, practical to take an agentive stance. You'd think an agent is the kind of thing, is the kind of system whose behavior we find it easier to understand or predict or work with using agential. I'm going to use agentive and agential interchangeably. Some people don't do that, but I'm going to do that. Concepts. What concepts are agential, agentive? Controversial, but generally it's sort of stuff to do with your sort of pulled out of your 1970s action philosophy hat, things to do with motivations and cognitions and emotions and stuff like that, or attitudes. Then it is the obvious one to wave at here. Davidson might be another one to wave at here. That's sort of the world. That's why I'm saying, like, there was a time when I was in grad school when you're like mentioning Dennett was like, why would, like, we're not, that's not a thing though, right? Like, it's like, great, he's great, and great, but it's sort of, it's not really like, wasn't taken like sort of given a lot of oomph. But obviously it used to be taken very seriously, and I think it's sort of come back. A lot of people I talk to are like, well, yeah, that's the right thing to do. The contrast is meant to be with sort of predicting, understanding, making use of, working with systems using non-agentive concepts. Again, what exactly they are is not entirely obvious, but it's stuff to do with sort of mechanical stuff. So purely extensional causal concepts, for example, if I sort of try to figure out what the thing does just by mapping inputs to outputs in purely extensional terms without using mental content stuff, then generally I'm not using agentive perspective on that. That's a totally great project to engage in. It's totally fine. Just a couple of things to note. If you do that, obviously it's observer relative. So what you find useful, helpful, interesting to do, which systems to predict and engage with in which ways, has a lot to do with what kind of system you are. So if you're very knowledgeable about a system, you're sort of, just the ins and outs of that thing. The causal stuff might pop out for you very much. So you can get really fine-grained details on how all the causal mappings go. You just go with that. If you're not very knowledgeable about this, then you might not use this. So the question of, right, like an agent is the kind of system that we find it easy to understand and predict. So the we is doing a lot of work here. For sure. It's also purpose dependent. So what we find useful to do might differ in different circumstances. If you have a lot of time, you might consult a total, go in the weeds on how that network works. What are the parameters that's been built? Like just look at it this way. If you don't have a lot of time, you're just going to go like, I guess, like what does the thing want from me now? And like why is it doing that? And so that might be fine. And so on this reading, I think the debate about the nature of agency, what things are agents, why these things are agents, is really a debate about a very general epistemic heuristic, sort of under what circumstances do which kind of agents find it helpful to treat which sorts of systems in using agential terms. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but that's really if that's what the debate about agency comes down to, it's really a sort of it's an exchange of biographical information about what you and I like to do. I like to do these things this way. Oh, what do you like to do? That's cool. What kind of agent, what are sort of, we can exchange sort of strategies about the kind of circumstance that you find helpful to do, but there's limits to the usefulness of that, because the systems you find useful to approach as an agent might be quite different from me, because we're sort of different people. With different purposes. So that's quite a shallow concept. If that's all that agency is, I don't know if we, like, if that's again, that's a totally fine concept of agency to use. It's just, I don't think, like, if that's what it is, we can stop here, and we don't need to like have a lot of philosophy of agency. It's really just whatever you want to do, it's cool. Like, depends on what you want to do. That's also not great because I think, and I'll come back to this, one of the main reasons why I think people are having so many talks on agency these days is because people look towards a general theory of agency to help us address particular questions in particular contexts. AI being the obvious one, we're treating these systems, and we want to know, are these really agents? Because depending on whether they're agents or not, you might think different actions on our parts are warranted, maybe different policy frameworks, different moral responses, different ways for me to interact in everyday life with these things might be required depending on whether that thing is an agent or not. Self-driving cars, whatever you want. Come back to that. But if that's what we mean by agent, then that's really not particularly, there's nothing much deep to be had about this here. So nothing wrong with this. It's just that I don't think if you want to make sense of the debate surrounding agency, and if you want to if you want to make sense of surrounding the debate of agency, I don't think this is the right way to look. And B, as I try to make clearer in a second, I think that doesn't. There's more to be said. We haven't reached the bottom of the barrel here. There's further things to be said. So I don't think we should just leave it at that. Which takes us to the second thing, which might you think that's exactly why the second project comes in handy. We might think, well, no, the reason why we care about debates about agency is because some things are agents and some things are not. What we, as philosophers or people engaged in these sort of things, are trying to figure out is we're trying to sort of carve nature at its joints, as those guys like to say. On this side are the agents, and on that side are the non-agents, and we'll try to figure out what's in this bucket and what's in that bucket, and why the bucket is shaped the way it is, if that metaphor works. So in that sense, the debate about agency is one of those standard like debates about the fundamental components of the universe. Obviously, we're in the 21st century, I think, whatever century we're in. We're not doing the like necessary and sufficient conditions thing anymore. That's old school. Also, the HPC stuff is kind of old school. There's lots of updated versions of an HPC thing, but something along those lines. No one says we need to specify like, you know, if and only if, the agent if and only if. But you want to sort of say there's a thing out there that's the agency thing, and we're going to sort of wave at it with the cluster or a set of sort of supporting a cluster with supporting things that sort of hold each other up in different ways. Great. This is important because this is very different from the first project, and sometimes people conflate this. But if you do this, it's not a debate about us. It's not a debate on the face of it of what we find useful to do. What kind of person are you? What kind of systems do you want to predict in what ways? It's not relevant. The question is this thing an agent or not? It has to do with the kind of features that thing has, and it either has the right features or it doesn't. That's cool. Now, what to say about that? What to say about this is this. I have one slide on meta-ontology and metaphysics to convince you why I think metaphysics and meta-ontology is really hard. So that's it. The short version of that slide is that stuff is hard and it gets super controversial super quickly. I think on the best reconstructions, the most charitable reconstructions of these debates, you're dealing with really complex sets of cases, and you're dealing with really complex pre-theoretic intuitions about a really complex set of cases. Obviously, I'm aware people do and have written tons of books on this. You can't do justice to it on a slide, but here's my personal, what I find helpful to think about this in this case. Back in the day, early 2000s, there's a huge thing in metaphysics on the metaphysics of material objects. You know, that's a debate that went like this, but in the early 2000s, it had a high, and there was this whole thing on four-dimensionalism versus three-dimensionalism. Ted Seider wrote a big book called Four-Dimensionalism, where he defends a sort of four-dimensionalist view on the metaphysics of material objects. Often sort of Cider and this book is sort of cited as like, it's in some ways, that's like the forefront of metaphysics and meta-ontology of that sort of way. He's super explicit in this book to say, here's a vast set of cases, and I think overall balancing everything, the best way to handle all our intuitions about all of these cases is to go four-dimensionist. But it's tricky. Sometimes we have to say, yeah, we have slightly more 3D intuitions about this case, but I have slightly more 4D intuitions about more cases, or maybe the 4D intuitions can do a better job dealing with, you know, the cases compared to the 3D stuff, even though they both sort of are somewhat grasped, both sides can somewhat grasp it. I just want to flag this because I think from a sort of metaphysical, meta-ontological perspective, in lots of ways, that makes it not all that different from the first perspective. In some ways, what we're still trying to figure out is what we find useful to do. In the first case, that was sort of directly, because agency just is how we approach these systems. Now it's sort of indirectly, in that we're sort of, because what this is trying to do is this sort of armchair a priori metaphysics that's trying to sort of juggle our intuitions, how we like to sort our intuitions, and then it says, well, that's what the universe is like. But somehow it's still our intuitions that guide this in the first place, in the Dennett sort of perspective, because that's literally what we're doing in the second case, because we think sort of our intuitions somehow guide us to the metaphysical truth. If you like this kind of stuff, that's great. It's just, so I think just to flag this, what the short, what I'm trying to say here is that unless you have a good new meta-ontology, meta-philosophy, this looks to me a lot like a version of the first, where we're just debating our intuitions. We're doing it for different reasons, but we're still debating our intuitions. Now, if that's not what you think we should be doing, then I think we're in the third bucket. And you might think there's a thing that's sort of in between the two sides of this, that's sort of epistemological on one side and sort of more world focused on the other side. And that's sort of the broadly scientific conceptual stuff. If you think, no, that's not the right way to think about it. When people debate questions of agency, what they're trying to do is that there's this concept, the concept of agency, and we're trying to figure out how to best employ that concept in our theorizing, modeling, and scientific usefulness usages. That makes it the same as when we have debates about what mass is, or what genes are, what species are, what social institutions are. These are all questions you might sort of think, oh, like social institutions, social ontology. It's been sort of the metaphysics of science is the thing. People debate the nature of species or genes or whatnot. Totally great. But in a way, that's slightly different, I think, from the first sort of a priori armchair metaphysics, because we're not looking at just sort of our intuitions about these things. We're trying to see where the rubber hits the road, like when the scientists employing these concepts, how does the employment of these concepts further their work or hinder their work? Do they generate new predictions, build better iPhones, or do they build worse iPhones after using these concepts in these ways? So really, it's about specifying the extension intention of a scientific term. So we're asking about the scientifically productive usages of the term. So for agency, really the question is, which systems do which scientists find useful to treat as agents? Now, I think this has sort of aspects of both parts of this, and it's funny that this is coming up, because obviously, we were just talking about inductive risk and all of this. Clearly, in some respect, we humans are scientists, and what we find useful to do is driving the science, for sure. But what we find useful to do isn't all there is to science. The world has a big part to play in what makes for good science. This is my version of inductive risk response. you can't, on this reading, you can't just say, here's my concept of agency. This is what I find. Here are the systems I find useful to treat as agents. Because just like I can't say, here's what I think is a gene. I'm going to go with that. I'm going to build my mRNA vaccine with my concept of a gene. You see what you do. That's not going to do it because my vaccine ain't going to cut it. It's just not going to work. Yours will, if you have the right concept of gene. So the world is going to play a big part in which concepts are useful to do. So I think that's the right debate to have about agency. We should ask, that's the right question to ask. I belabor this because in lots of conversations about this, people are want to do one of the other things, or they're not sure, and there's a lot of confusion. Even some really good discussion, like Samir Kasha's book, is really great in lots of ways. Also, sometimes where I'm not quite sure which side of this we're falling. So I think this is the right question to ask. Again, it's nothing against the other projects, but I think there's interesting stuff to say about this, so I'm going to run with this. So again, the question about when I say I want to know what sort of things are agents, I'm asking this not from a sort of what I find useful to do, not from a sort of metaphysics, like what's the natural kind of agency. I'm asking which things should scientists treat as agents from a scientific perspective? What is usefully treated as an agent? And here's where I want to say, here's where the title is, like, it's kind of silly, but like, I think no systems are used, like from a scientific perspective, there's no such thing as a good usage of the concept of agency. So that's not, so it's sort of the lesson, like not everything that might seem like would be a productive use, a concept to employ in a certain context is in fact a useful concept to employ. The concept of a general concept of agency isn't a helpful scientific concept at all. Why do I think that? And I think that because first, let's just look at how actually scientists have used the concept of agency. And it turns out they've done so in very different ways for very different reasons. So generally, the debate about agency in economics is a debate about the kinds of systems that it is useful to treat within the choice architecture of standard economic theory. To which systems can I model well, the behavior of which systems can I model well by attributing to these systems expectations about future states of the economy, current states of the economy, and motivations, preferences about rankings over these evaluations over these different states of the economy. So when I ask, are firms agents of their own, which is a classic debate in the history of economics, and with legal components, it's an important debate still in lots of different ways. We're really asking, is it the case that firms have, is it useful to attribute separate utility values, separate preferences, separate probability values to firms? Not just sort of aggregating over, doing some social choicey thing where I sort of take individual employees and aggregate over this. No, I'm going to attribute a firm utility function to this thing. That's what that debate is coming down to. I should note, and I'm going to come back to this in a second, like there's lots of ways to model this. You can be a prospect theoretician, you can do standard expected utility theory, you like regret theory better, whatever you want. You can do simple heuristics on lots of different ways. Lots of different ways to model the choice architecture here. That's important. We'll come back to that. But that's what that debate is. It's about really like the usefulness of attributing utility values, separate utility values to these entities. That's so irrelevant when it comes to evolutionary biology. This paper grew out of, is growing out of this Templeton grant I have with some biologists, and we're looking at internal conflicts in collective agents in biology and economics. So I'm talking to these biologists a lot, and this will come up later, so I mention it. And so for them, there's sort of a big debate in biology is these guys come out of sort of a gene-centric perspective, but they're trying to do justice to all the sort of recent work that's sort of gene-centric and sort of trying to think about this. And so their question is, to what extent, under what conditions, is it useful to treat genes as evolutionary agents of their own, as opposed to, for example, the organism they're part of? So meiotic drivers are genes that alter the way that they manipulate the way meiosis works in organisms to increase their replication success, irrespective of what's good for the organism. So there seems to be like what the agential perspective of the gene is in conflict with the agential perspective on the organism. There's sort of that's the internal conflict, or one version of the internal conflict here. What that comes down to, though, is really it's a question about whether there's a separate fitness trajectory for genes as opposed to these organisms. When I track what's from an evolutionary perspective, what happens to these different systems, the gene system, the organism system, or groups of organisms versus individual organisms, or whatever, these different systems, is it useful to treat these as having separate trajectories over evolutionary time? So this is a question about whether it's useful to attribute fitness values to them. It's nothing to do with expectations or preferences or evaluations of the world. None of that. Genes don't evaluate things. Genes don't have preferences. Genes don't have expectations. That's cool. That's not what's relevant. That's not the question we're asking. So if you think about AI, computer science, engineering in different ways, that's also not at all relevant. So here's self-driving cars. I this morning read an article about the fact that so Waymo, I think, I've forgotten where they just increased started in a new city. I've forgotten where. Is it Pittsburgh? They just started Pittsburgh. So today, yesterday, whenever it was, like this is the sixth city now in the US, or seventh, I think, where they're operating. So it's not, if we're thinking about self-driving cars, are they agents? We're not asking whether they have separate fitness values of them. They're not part of a biological population. That's not what's relevant. It's also really not a question about the cognitions, whether they have whether it's reasonable to attribute separate expectations or preferences to them. And that's because in lots of ways, what makes them exciting and scary and fun to talk about isn't so much that, I mean, there's the singularity and they will take over the world and they at some point will decide to just do their own thing. But in the short term, that's not really what's interesting. The agents, to the extent what makes them fun, and it's easy to forget that, is, right, you specify where you want to go. That's not what's at stake. We know what the thing wants. It wants to get you from here to there. What's really hard about self-driving cars is that it has to sort of be an autonomous decision maker within that space. Like now there's a dog running across the street, a weird bicycle thing, there's like a leaf blowing across the street. It has to respond in real time to these and to all of these local circumstances and navigate around that within that space. So it's really something about generating sub-goals from the given goal. It's not about having expectations or preferences. It's really about sort of being an online, in the moment inference engine, sub-goal, practical decision maker of that kind. So this point is just to say, look, this is what this is what concepts of agency are doing, the kind of work that they've been employed. And that looks all very different. Now you might say, well, yeah, that's cool, but you don't get it. Like underneath all of that, there is a general concept of agency, like the general thing, and these are just sort of token applied versions of specific concept of the general concept of agency. And so in some ways, this is sort of where the heart of the negative part of the talk is. I think that's wrong, and that's misleading. And I think people think that, and they have provided various ways to come up with general classifications of agency because they thought they needed that to justify their specific applications of agency in their particular context. So the general strategy is meant to be, is this self-driving car, this LLM, this gene, is this an agent? Well, let me ask what sort of things generally are agents and then apply it to this particular case. as I try to make clear, I think that's the wrong strategy to go. And the reason why I think that's the wrong strategy to go is that there is no upper level to go to. There is no, that's not the path you should take. So in a much cited paper, which probably come up a lot in these talks here, is the Barandarian et al. Paper from 2009, which is called Defining Agency. It's a number of computer scientists developing this paper, but they're using examples from all sorts of sciences, and the goal is to justify particular concepts of agency for use in computer science, but justify it by seeing that these concepts derive from a general concept of agency. They say an agential system should be seen as a system that is distinguishable from its environment, that is active, and that is acting in accordance with a certain goal or norm. That's great. But you all are philosophers, so immediately you go like, well, duh, what does that mean? You need to specify what that means, because none of these things are like uncontroversial terms that have like a well-defined extension or intention across domains. How you think about that will differ in different contexts. If you just sort of leave it open, this is the intentional stance again, because I can justify absolutely anything being an agent in this way. Distinguishable from the environment. Distinguishable by who? By me? Because I can distinguish lots of systems from your environment. So here's a system that's often thought to be like not an agent. That's if you take a soccer ball and put it on a hill, it's rolling down a hill. That's not an agential system, because you can't distinguish the agent, the soccer ball, from the environment, the hill. But of course I can. There's the soccer ball, there's the hill, the town next door, that's the environment. Here's the system. It's distinguishable from the environment, and so on and so forth. So obviously, and for me, the thing that's funny or interesting funny is 3 acting accordance to a certain goal or norm. If you've taken a semi-class in philosophy of social science somewhere, you're like, wait, acting in accordance with a rule, like following a rule, isn't Kripkenstein? Didn't we read this somewhere? Isn't that a thing? Yeah, that's like about, if you wanted to teach philosophy of social science, you could just do it surrounding on 3. Like the history of philosophy of social science is 3. So unless you spell it out in some way, you say nothing. Now let's spell it out. You mean acting in accordance to a rule? You mean you have an explicit representation of a goal or a rule? Great. Genes are not going to be agents on this. It's just going to fall straight out of the picture. Self-driving cars are going to fall out of the picture. Great, but so that it's just awkward if you, from the armchair, rule out systems that are well treated as agents in certain sciences. You're just like, well, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Genes are not agents. And I know that because I decided on a particular reading for 3. That sounds like to me the armchair metaphysics project that we're trying not to do. Kent et al. Also a bunch of, I'm waffling on too long, so I'm going to try a little bit faster. Sorry about that. Kent et al. Also, some of these guys are at Google, and they're also so computer scientists, but also Kasha falls into this picture. Is you see agents are about systems that manage to make a pass through their environment in the right sort of ways. So Kent and I'll say agents are systems that would adapt their policy if they were aware that the decisions influence the world in a different way. So if the sort of worry is that you're not an agent if you sort of your fixed action pattern WASP that keeps doing the same thing, your Roomba, you know, your robot vacuum cleaner thing that's like stuck in a corner now and goes like not an agent. Why? Because if you do the vacuum yourself and you find yourself in a corner, you're not like stuck there forever. You're like, maybe this isn't working for me. I have to change something. And the Roomba isn't going to do that. Actually, the Roomba is going to randomize. It's going to do something. But like a bad Roomba would get stuck there, and that would be a problem. Okasha, also the whole premise of the book in lots of ways is about, and again, love the book, but sort of one place is one key premise of the book that's sort of running through the book, to the extent they're different parts, they're sort of not totally hanging together, but agency is about optimizing systems. So he wants to sort of compare the fitness and the utility thing, because both cases are about systems optimizing with respect to their environment in different ways. But that can't be a general concept of agency. You don't want to build into your concept of agency the view that you do it right. You can't, you can do all sorts of things, but that's not how the concepts of agency are used in lots of different contexts like economics. The whole rationality debates in the 70s, the whole behavioral economics debate wasn't about whether humans are agents. The question is to what extent we're like rational agents, to what extent we're good decision makers. And what Kahneman and et al. have figured out over the years is that we're actually kind of bad decision makers in lots of ways. We're sort of like the Roomba that gets stuck in a corner, and then we don't update our beliefs in the sort of right sort of ways. All of that. The question isn't whether we're not agent. Of course we're agent. That was not part of the debate. The question is whether we're good agents. So we can't see agents as optimizing systems. Now the thing, when I give this, then someone's going to go like, you take optimizing too literally. Like, I just mean optimizing like you have a goal and you evaluate stuff. Of course, you can read optimizing as like pick a goal and act towards that goal. But then my toaster is also an agent, because it has a goal, make the bread. Depending if you're British, you want the bread either crispy or warm. Like if you're British, you just want it to be crispy, and then you wait for it to cool down to eat it. If you're not British, you want it to be both crispy and warm. Anyway, the toaster can get you that. That's a side note. You don't need two toasters. You can use the same toaster in Britain as you would here. You just use it different. So you can do that. Then there's the sort of your this is arguably your, like, this is the other thing that I've gotten, like, if you're coming out of philosophy, particularly if you're got a foot in moral philosophy, not just like down the hall, up the hall, or whatever, like Michael Smith or something, it's going to someone is like, didn't Michael Smith say something about agency? Yeah, he did. So here's a view about agency out of the philosophical context. You have internal representations, you have sort of goal state representations, you have certain wants, you have certain beliefs, you have certain commitments and whatnot. And you act towards this to the extent that you are this. That's what it means to be an agent. That's totally great. Genes will not qualify as agents unless you have a super broad view of what it is to be a representation, which is great. So if you do something like teleosemantics or various conceptions of what internal representations are, lots of systems are representational. Lots of systems turn out to be to have internal representations in these ways. But in fact, arguably, like, unless you specify what exactly you mean here, anything is in some sense like the, representational in that regard. So that's that. And then that's the sort of cybernetic-y thing, where it's sort of that view is something like agency is really about doing stuff. It's about not, like, you're not an agent if you sit still. You're an agent if you sort of do stuff. And for the same sort of reason, obviously, what does it mean to do things? Lots of things do things. And so the model here is meant to be a feather in the wind isn't an agent because it's not active. It's not doing anything. A bird gliding, an eagle gliding, is active because it's doing something. Of course, it's not actually doing anything either. It's also just being carried by the wind, but it potentially could do something or something, which is just to say, unless you spell out what it means to be active, anything could be the feather is active in the sense that it's moving through space and time. So isn't that good enough? Anyway, as that waffle on too much. So the point is, I think when you think about scientific concepts, typically people say what makes for a good, useful scientific concept. Generally something, and again, these criteria are controversial, exactly which criteria you put in is controversial. But I think for what I want to say, it doesn't actually matter exactly which criteria you want to use. But it's some version of projectability, some version of like doing, it's the kind of thing that is a good concept, is one that allows you to crank the handle and generate new predictions. Often, if you can formalize it, that's sort of a good concept. Concepts are not formalizable, are not generally good concepts. The beauty of concepts like fitness or concepts of agency based on things like fitness or expected utility, or even these sort of sub-goal generations. These are all things that are formalizable and have been formalized. These make for sort of good concepts. You know, being an active system is not formalizable. It's like that's just too broad. We don't have enough structure to work with, so it's hard to make for a good concept. Practically, it's the kind of concept that it's a good concept is one that generates the kind of explanations. And so you want to look at sort of how the concept has been used. Is it the kind of concept that has generated helpful explanations? And if you look at sort of economics, and if you look at biology, and if you look at computer science, there's all these concepts of agency that have been used to generate explanations, but these general concepts they sort of fall out of the picture. They sort of are used on the way, but they themselves haven't done any actually explanatory work. Unification is the sort of the one, and I want to put in as there are also other ones you can appeal to, but unification is interesting because you might think, well, that's important, and sort of what this general concept of agency do is to help me unify these different things, which is totally fair. And so if, like, at best, this third thing is unificatory. But I want to suggest it's the general concept that I've been talking about, they're not even unificatory because they're going to leave stuff out unless you spell it out in different ways. And if you don't spell it out, they leave nothing out. So it can't be unificatory if it's like, if you're Spinoza and it's God or nature, you ain't famously, right? Like, was Spinoza an atheist or was it a pantheist? It's kind of hard if it's all God or nature. That's what I just said. It's not unificatory because it's not the same. It's not explanatory yet. But now here's where people go. Here's where the pluralism was meant to be helpful, but it's probably not helpful. Here's what I don't want to say I'm not trying to say that when economists talk about agency that I think they're confused, or that when biologists talk about agency, they're confused. I think these are totally, totally good. In specific context, it's perfectly reasonable to want to appeal to a concept of agency. Totally reasonable. That can do a lot of good work. I think maybe the right thing to do is to maybe, if you want it, like, because people use these terms, let's just keep these terms, economic agency and biological agency. And the better way to think about it in lots of ways is they have nothing to do with each other. We could also call them different things. And maybe the right thing to do is let's just not talk about agency anymore. Just don't get ourselves confused about this. Or if you want to talk about agency, just don't think that when you use agency and they use agency, we're using it in different ways. There's not a thing here to be had. We don't have anything in common in principle. There could also be physical agency. We could also treat physical systems as agential in certain ways. I have absolutely no problem with that. These are just that's it. How long do I have?
I think I have about 8 minutes.
8 minutes. I love it.
9.
9. Okay. That's cool. So let me say this. So obviously, this is just to say, specific versions of these things might satisfy whatever criteria you want to put forward as good scientific criteria. So as I say, if you're an economic agent, that's projectable because that's precisely the kind of thing that they've spent all their time modeling, and they have a lot of math, too much math, arguably, in economics. They do that. And there's sort of fun stuff that you can explain using these concepts. For example, if firms are agents of their own, then you'd expect the existence to be of internal firm conflict, where what the firm wants is different from what the individual employees of the firm want. This is something that's I'm thinking about a lot these days, because this is part of our grant where we're thinking about internal conflict. And I have some other work that I'm exploring this, but so I couldn't talk about this at length, but 8 minutes in all, so I won't. But so that's that. It's sort of unificatory in its own small way. Obviously, the point is, now we're committing ourselves to a particular view of agency. So it's not going to be able to, that view of agency doesn't translate straightforwardly to, say, biology or computer science, but it still might generalize to sort of other fun contexts where we're debating about, for example, state actors. And you can have, so for example, the interest of US democracy and what the people currently voters want may not be always in line. That's known as the paradox of democracy. It's a big thing that political economists have been debating from Popper and onwards. Hayek, whatnot, sort of classic liberalist sort of concerns. That on this reading might turn out to be exactly the same sort of phenomenon as unionization drives, where, you know, what's good for the union isn't necessarily good for all the employees, and so on and so forth. And this isn't going to be true for every concept of agency. You could come up with concepts of agency in economics that are kind of bad, that wouldn't satisfy this. Like anything that features in an economic model is going to be an economic agent. That's not right. There are lots of things that you put in your economic models that wouldn't qualify as good agents, that are not that aren't generalizable in these ways. So that's that. The same goes for evolutionary biology. I'm not going to bore you with that. The point is, I don't think we should say that a system is or isn't an agent. I think we should ask, what do we mean by agent, and is it useful to treat this particular thing as an agent given the kind of investigations, the kind of explanations I want to do in this particular context. There's some cool contingency. I don't know if that comes later, but I'm going to say now. Contingency that's a possibility possible here. It may be the case that certain evolutionary biological agents also turn out to be economic agents. That's not an a priori generally guaranteed question. Now that's an a posteriori question. Could be that organisms turn out to be economic agents sometimes, animals maybe. It could be that they're not. We have to look. These are different concepts. They may or may not line up sometimes, and that we can find that out separately. But the last thing I want to say for my last 5 minutes, or maybe 3, is people are worried, I think so, with conversations, is that if you say this kind of thing, and again, you know, people have mumbled about this for a while. People say, like, if you say that, then you can't assess new concepts of agency, and you just don't know now whether LLMs are agents, because you don't have a general thing to latch onto, and so we're like stuck now. Of course, that's wrong, because what we need to ask now is, take an LLM. Is an LLM ChatGPT, 5, or Claude, or Claude is what we're using here. So let's stick with the Pitt-approved Claude. Is it or is it not an agent? Well, there's lots of things we could treat it. We've got different concepts to use, but we've got like general we can think about it as from the point of view of which sort of concepts are useful to employ in our thinking about agency in this particular concept. We could do some sort of Turing testy thing. Can I distinguish that thing from a human? Does it act like? Am I sure that when I'm in a like chatbot situation that, or can I, when I interact with the nice folks at the airline company? Let's not talk. That gives me heart palpitations talking about airline company. Let's say your toaster is broken, and you call the toaster company, and you're on a chat with them. Are you sure it's a real person that you're chatting with, or maybe it's just an LLM powered chatbot? Do you know? Probably not. Maybe. It's still like, also, if you've graded some student papers recently, often you can tell. I can sort of tell when I read a paper. That's probably been LM generated. M-dash is apparently it's a big thing. I use M-dashes so much, so I find that very frustrating. There's one right there. And so you can still sort of, there's a certain way in which these things write, but that might sort of go. But again, that's sort of a funny way to ask, because very different. That's now it's really putting that too much on us. That makes it too much like a Dennetian thing. When we're asking about useful scientific concepts, we're not asking what I can distinguish. It's really about the world is meant to do some work. So that's not a good way to do it. But I think, and this is where these computer science guys, that really that's what they're interested in. They want to sort of say, let's treat as an agent the kind of systems that are not like a Roomba, for example, stuck in a corner. And on that, I think the reasonable reading is LMs don't turn out to be agents. Yes, they're learning systems on some regards, but on the relevant, narrowly defined parameters of this thing, these systems don't change their behavior in light of their environment. They build a certain associations, and these associations change. But given where the system is, it doesn't alter its processing if it learns some information about the world. It's really just a sentence completion mechanism, and it always will stay that way. It processes in the same way. Artificial general intelligence systems are on that measure, which is right the next new frontier, and why these guys are so excited about this. And I think they're rightly excited about this, because these kind of systems, these are the systems that would do precisely this. There would be systems that can take all sorts of information and not just produce different outputs given that information. There's different, but they change the way these systems work. They're really a general intelligence systems in this way. That makes them agents on that measure. That seems to be a reasonable way of understanding agency in this context. That's interesting from a policy perspective. That tells me something about which systems I might be more worried about regulating, you know, and which systems less so. But it's not, you know, that's nothing like, we can't say, well, that's true agency. And you know, when the biologists talk about agency, they don't know what they're talking about. That's not what I want to say. That's just a good use of agency when we think about computer systems, AI systems. But it's not the right view to think about agency when it comes to biological systems or economic systems. I don't want to necessarily say Kenton and I'll write about that or whatever, but it seems to me that's the right way to look for this. And we just want to look at these specific concepts. Okay. So I want to say there's no general sort of signs of agency. People think we need a general thing of agency, but we don't actually need it. But there are different localized versions of this that work in different specific signs. So that's where the eliminative pluralism is, but it's a bad title. I don't want to say that anything goes. That's not it either. I think there's some concepts are better than others. And we can criticize a particular concept of agent that's been proposed. We don't have to sit idly by and say, oh, anything you want to do is good. It depends. The concept has to do the right kind of work, and we can assess that independently. We can assess that locally without having a general concept of agency. So you might think, well, I've heard this before. Didn't Ereshevsky in the early 90s say stuff about species in this way? Didn't Edouard write a book in 2009 about concepts that's also like this? It's kind of like this. Totally. But importantly, so you can the lesson is there's no general answer to be had about which concepts are like this and which are not. We have to assess this on a case-by-case basis. So you can go like, yeah, Shevsky is just wrong about species. Like here's what a species is. A species is a, you know, a gene pool, anything that's reproductively isolated. And that's just it. Eco-species just isn't a thing. Cool. You can still agree with me. You can agree with Edouard on concepts and like, you know, concepts weren't, that's just that that's not a thing. Although I don't know if you've in the later books, concepts appear more. Anyway, it's overrated. It's totally not a problem. And so we can change our mind about things. Totally cool. But so the point really is that's the point. The point is agency. I think let's not worry about like if you see a paper with a title defining agency, just be suspicious. Like we don't need to do that. We need to define agency here, and we don't need it. Like here's what an agency is. An agent is in general. There's no such thing. This may not hold for other things, but I think it holds for agency, and that's all I got to say. Thank you.
All right, so we'll take a 2-minute break, and then we'll have time for questions.